The following program is brought to you by the friends and partners of Andrew Wommack Ministries. On this special edition of Gospel Truth, we pull back the curtain and show you how God took an unlikely college dropout and made him a Bible teacher with a platform to the world. On today's program, we go to Texas, where it all began in 1968. Join us now as we celebrate 50 years of the true gospel in the life and ministry of Andrew Wommack.
Nearly every day of my life, I go back and rehearse what God has done. There has been very, very few days in the last 50 years that I haven't thought about March the 23rd, 1968.
Anyone acquainted with Andrew Wommack knows that on March 23, 1968, as a Texas teenager, he had a profound encounter with God at a Baptist church prayer meeting. It's a story he tells on many stages.
I want to ask Joe Nay to come up here. This is the man that was my mentor, and Nikki, without this man touching my life, you wouldn't have been healed, or not through me. So I want you to meet Joe. This man, what God did in him is a big part of what happened to you right here. Joe Nay was in our Baptist church, and he was just over the top excited and in love with the Lord, and nobody else in that church was like that. Steve and I, my best friend, we would go out on Thursday night and do church visitation. So we just looked him up on the church rolls, got his address, and went over to his house. It turned out it was his birthday. We didn't know that. And they invited us in, and Steve went straight to the refrigerator and found a pie that his wife had made for him for his birthday, and we sat down and ate the whole thing. He didn't even get any of it. We had never met him before. And Joe, he could have been offended at us, but instead he just sat down and started talking to us about the Lord because he had just been born again. He had been a pagan.
Well, I thought Andrew was a very overbearing little kid at that time. I wasn't ready for that type of person at that young age. But when I saw how hungry he was and exuberant that he was in the Lord, I changed my whole opinion of him.
So anyway, for a year and a half, he had been telling us about all of this and letting us know that there was more to God than what we had experienced. So in a sense, he had made us hungry. We were really hungry for more of the Lord. And what really changed my life was on March the 23rd, 1968. I was in a prayer meeting at 12 o'clock midnight.
We were in the pastor's study praying with the pastor.
Now this will show you a little bit of how religious I was, because at 18 years old, on a Saturday night, we always met together. We've been doing it for over a year. My best friends and I, some of the leaders of the church, met together and prayed from 10 o'clock until 12 midnight on Saturday night. This night we were just talking about something, and the youth director had hit his knees and started praying, and he prayed for 30 minutes, just pouring his heart out to the Lord. He was crying and seeking the Lord. And instead of me entering in and agreeing with him or praying with him, I just got to thinking, what am I going to pray? What's everybody going to think about me? And I don't even know how it happened, Stephen, but just somehow, it's like God pulled back a curtain and I saw what a hypocrite I was, and that I wasn't praying to God. And it was all about impressing all of my friends and the leaders of this church, and he just showed me that I was a total hypocrite. I've said this many times, and people always think I'm exaggerating, but I was taught in that Baptist church that God is the one that killed my dad, that God is the one who caused problems. God struck people dead. It was all performance-based. And when I finally saw that my performance was all bad and that everything I'd done was just hypocritical and it was religious, it wasn't genuine, I honestly thought that God was going to kill me. And I just turned myself inside out, and I started confessing everything I'd ever done. And I hadn't done that much outward stuff, But you know, if you've lusted in your heart, you're guilty of adultery. I confessed in front of the leaders of the church and all of my friends, every person I'd ever lusted at, every thought I'd ever had, every time I'd ever gotten mad, everything I'd ever thought about a person, things that probably I had no business confessing, but I was just getting rid of everything I could think of. And I mean, for an hour and a half, I just turned myself inside out. And I was just laying there in a puddle of tears, waiting on what God's response was going to be. And I don't know how to explain this, but I mean a love of God, a supernatural love came over me. God's pure love for me. And it was wonderful. I mean, I was tangibly feeling the love of God. It was wonderful, but it was confusing too, because I had been taught that God loved you when you did everything right. And for the first time in my life, I realized I'd not done anything right. So anyway, it was right out here. They used to have a 2-story church out here, out to the street, and that's the church that I grew up in. And then as the church grew, they built all of this. And it was not long after they had built this that I had that experience with the Lord. And it was in that room that was right there in the corner. That used to be the pastor's study. And I was in there praying, and God showed up.
Andrew had an awesome experience at that time. And we'd go into meetings every night somewhere.
And we divided Arlington, Texas into sections and started knocking on 100 to 200 doors a day, witnessing to people.
We believed we could reach the world. We actually believed that.
The three of us were so in love with the Lord and so excited that we fed off of each other. There was a woman, I forget her name, but there was somebody who had cancer and was in Arlington Memorial Hospital.
Yeah.
And Joe said, well, it says right here, if we lay hands on them, they'll be healed. And I said, do you really believe that? And we talked about it. And anyway, I remember you and me. I'm not sure if Steve was with us.
Just you and I went up.
But we went up and prayed for that lady, and she was healed.
Along about that time, we started this New Testament Baptist church. And nobody could be a member of this church unless they were born again. Isn't that stupid?
We were going to win Arlington, Texas to the Lord.
And so we had tent meetings. Me and Andy and Steve Mock. Steve played the piano. It was so cold he played it with his gloves on. And Andrew was leading the music. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 time. I never will forget that. We didn't know what we were doing, but we were doing it.
I was at the University of Texas at Arlington, and I got $350 a month as long as I stayed in school from the government. It was Social Security from my dad's death. So I got paid $350 a month for going to school, plus I was living at home, so I didn't have hardly any expense. I had a deferment from the draft as long as I stayed in school, and I had the acceptance of everybody as long as I stayed in school. And I was sitting in our religion class one day, and I remember the instructor was up there teaching. And he was I forgot what he was talking about. I really wasn't paying attention because of all of this other stuff that was going on. And finally he said, you know what a fanatic is? He says, I'm going to give you a definition of a fanatic. And so we were writing it down, it'd be on our test. And he said, a fanatic is somebody who's closer to God than you are. And here were all of his little groupies on the front row down there, and they were just taking notes. And he says, isn't that right, Andrew? He says, isn't that what they say about you? He says, you know why they say that? Because you're closer to God than they are. And man, it perked my ears up, got my attention. And I thought, what is the point of me being in school? I'm not listening to anything. And I said, this isn't what I desire. And so I just said, I'm going to quit school.
You remember when your mom stuck her finger in my nose? Don't lead my boy astray.
She actually was a supervisor in the Arlington public school system, and she was chosen out of all of the teachers in Arlington, Texas, to go and get a master's degree in 1 year. And so for me to say that I was going to quit school, boy, that really, really bothered my mother. A recruiter came out to my house, knocked on the door, and he walked in, opened up his briefcase, spread all of his stuff out on the table, and started telling me all of the advantages to me volunteering for the draft rather than being drafted. And I said, I can save you and me both a lot of time. I said, the reason you're here is because I quit school. And he said, yep, that's right. And I said, well, the reason I quit school is because God told me to quit school. And he kind of snickered. And I said, so therefore, see, God told me to quit school. That means God's responsible for what happens to me. If God wants me drafted, I'll be drafted. And if he doesn't, I won't. And this guy broke out laughing. And he said, boy, I can guarantee you, you're going to be drafted. I got right up in this guy's face, and I said, I put my finger in his chest, and I said, buddy, if God wants me drafted, I'll be drafted. And if he doesn't, you or the United States government or all the demons in hell can't draft me. And this guy just stood up, packed up all of his stuff, walked out the door, and the next morning my draft notice was in the mailbox. And my mother just thought I had lost my mind. And in June of that year, she went with the First Baptist Church of Arlington, Texas, to Billy Graham's crusade in Bern, Switzerland. And it was a 3-week trip that they did. And the associate pastor of First Baptist Church put this whole thing together, and we had this 3-week trip with a whole group of Baptist people, and my mother signed us up and took us to Bern, Switzerland on this thing, and specifically talked to this guy to straighten me out and fix whatever was wrong with me. And really, I think, I've said that I went for about 4.5 months, and I was just in this bubble and stuff. And I think the reason I came down off of it is because of this guy just hounding me and telling me every day I was of the devil. And it made me begin to question and ask questions about what was going on. And I think that's the reason that I lost some of that sense of God's presence and love, was because I was just criticized so severely.
A supernatural experience like the one Andrew had in 1968 is never erased, but the euphoria that comes with it will always fade. What replaced it in Andrew's life has made all the difference. Within months of his March 23rd experience, young Andrew was sent to Army basic training, where his relationship with God was tested every day.
And the very first day of basic, the sergeant got to asking people, says, so what did you do in the world? And people would talk about, I told him I used to pour concrete and things like this. This one guy, he says, you don't want to know what I did. And he said, no, I want to know. And so he says, I was a pimp. And this sergeant says, you're my kind of guy. And he made him the trainee field sergeant over the whole 200. And it turns out his dad was a Baptist pastor. And when I got to talking to him about the Lord, he says, I know what I'm doing is wrong. And he respected me for standing up and doing this. And because of it, this guy's name was Duck, is what they called him. And we had a race riot in our barracks. And this Duck came back one weekend after being drunk. And they just took us one by one and started beating our heads on the floor. It was concrete floor. We had a drain in the middle of the floor, and there was so much blood that flowed that it stopped the drain up, and you had to slosh through the blood on the deal. They sent every white guy in my barracks to the infirmary but me. And I was the last one on the row, and Duck was the guy that was doing all of this and beating all these guys up and doing stuff. And when he got to me, he came over and grabbed me like this and pulled me up, and he looked at me, and he was drunk when he was doing all of this, and he recognized who I was and just threw me back on the bunk. And that was it. I'm the only guy that didn't get beat up. And I tell you, God just preserved me through that stuff. It was awesome. They had the chaplain come talk to us, and they had 200 people in bleachers. So I went and talked to this chaplain and asked him about becoming a chaplain's assistant. And he said, and because I thought it was a non-combatant position, and so I wouldn't have to kill anybody. And he says, no, you are the chaplain's bodyguard. He says, you are a combatant. And he says, to be a conscientious objector, you have to say that you would not kill a person even if your life was at risk. And I said, I wouldn't say that. And I said, I can't do that. And he says, well, then your best thing would be that you ought to become a chaplain's assistant. And I said, what do I have to do? And he said, I can turn your name in, but they choose one chaplain assistant for every 10,000 troops. So he says, you got one chance in 10,000 of making it. And so I said, okay. And anyway, I just knew somehow I was going to be a chaplain's assistant. I told everybody that's what my MOS was going to be. And the day that we graduated, they post what our job was going to be. And I was the only one out of 10,000 chosen to be a chaplain's assistant.
Following his brutal basic training, Andrew was deposited into the Vietnam War and assigned to combat chaplain Don Wilson, a minister with real integrity.
In those days, we didn't have phones. They had these wind-up radio things, and nobody would get the call by the commander, you know, or the sergeant. And the sergeant says to me, "We don't know who it is, but they want to talk to you." I said, "Oh, okay." So this chaplain got on there. He was one of the higher chaplains, and he says, "Don," and I knew he didn't know me, "we want to give you a chaplain assistant."
He called Chaplain Wilson on a field phone, got him in the field.
Now, that's not the way they do things over there. You have to beg to get one. But here's one saying, "We want to give you a chaplain assistant." So I said to him, "Why, sir?" And he said, "Well, I guess I'll have to tell you the truth." I said, "That would help."
And he says, "We got a boy here that is way too religious for us," and says, "We can't tolerate him. Would you take him and put him on the fire support base?"
I said to him, "Oh, well, send him on out. I think we could use some of the religious you're talking about."
But he wanted to be out in the field with the troops. And so he didn't stay up on the fire support base or in the rear area. He was out in the field with the troops, and he was living with them and ministering to these guys.
Even though this man had given me a chaplain assistant, they had lost 7, as I remember, 7 chaplain assistants recently got killed. So they didn't want any of the chaplain assistants to go to the field.
So they put me out there, and he had a special order to keep me alive. So I was supernaturally protected on this fire support base.
That is not to say that that hill didn't get fighting. It did. So I said to him, "You know what? You stay here and do some Bible studies with 2 or 3 or whoever, 5 or 6. And you just minister to the guys on this hill." They had to get to know him. I mean, Andrew was a guy that he's going to tell you right now where he is. Religiously, culturally, or anything else. He will not beat around the bush. He's going to tell you.
I mean, the very first night that we got there, nobody knew each other because we came from all over, and so we were just thrown together, and we were all laying there and the lights were out and people were cussing God and blaspheming, and man, there was vile things going on. And I just yelled out in the dark about, man, God will not hold you guiltless if you take His name in vain. And boy, they said that, they turned the lights on. Who said that? And I wouldn't say anything. I just laid there and they turned the lights off, and then I'd say something else. And I mean, I got off on the wrong foot with most of these guys.
And in the beginning, people kind of said, "Oh, what have we here?" And I didn't say much. I said, "He'll be all right." But you know what? Some of the same guys, and I remember one guy that, what was he now? He didn't believe in God at all, hated God. And as I remember, Andy told me one night he accepted the Lord through Andrew. See, that's why we were there.
Most of the time I was without a chaplain. I was just, and it was amazing because his fire support base was on a battalion level, and the brigade level was back 40-something miles away. And I was assigned to the brigade because I was a chaplain's assistant, but I lived on the battalion level, so that what this meant was that nobody on my fire support base was my boss.
He gave him some time to read the Bible. He read the whole Bible through, I don't know how many times, and really digested it. Now, when you think back on it, if he had a job here in America, would he have had time to do it as he did there?
I knew that I was either going to be pulled into the world and pulled into the things of the devil, or I was going to be closer to the Lord as a result. And out of desperation, I started studying the Word. And I did it 16 hours a day just because, when I was in Vietnam, our bunker was totally plastered with nude pictures. And you couldn't go anywhere without seeing nudity. And I never saw a woman when I was in Vietnam, but I saw thousands and thousands and thousands of nude women through these posters. You couldn't look up without seeing this kind of stuff. It was just all around you. And so, there was nothing to do except like this. This is the way I made it, 16 hours a day. I had to just keep the Bible in front of me. I had a bigger Bible then so that I could...
We didn't put them up. These other guys put them up there. And we would get them down, and then some more would appear. So we had to live with that. It was tough.
I would say that in Vietnam as a whole, I wasn't tempted by most of the stuff that some of the people went through. Like, I never was tempted with dope. I never had to sit there and resist it one time. I had no desire for it. I never was tempted with drinking and any of that stuff. And so during one of these stand downs, I remember going back to Chu Lai, which was on the South China Sea, and they had a auditorium thing that would seat 200, 300 people, and they would bring in these Filipino showgirls, and they were singing and dancing and doing all this. And one of my chaplains, not the one that I really spent a lot of time with, but he was over me, he was my superior, he got drunk and stripped naked and got up on the stage and tried to have sex with the Filipino girls and stuff. And so anyway, I was out there standing on the beach, and it was totally dark at night, and all of these lights, and they were just screaming and yelling, and it was an orgy is what it was. But I remember it was just like a magnet pulling me towards that. Thinking, well, you could go stand at the back, you could participate a little, you don't have to go and have sex with these girls and do everything. But man, I was just being drawn towards this, and I was out on that beach, and I spent hour upon hour, just crying out to God and praying and asking God to preserve me for that. But I can tell you, I was running out of steam. And if I hadn't have gotten into the Word, and if God hadn't have started showing me the Word, I would have lost it. I remember one time I stayed up all night long praying and just asking God to touch me and do something. I didn't know how to get back to where I was. And I was depressed and discouraged because I wasn't feeling that same emotion that I had right after that initial experience. And I was just begging God to touch me and that God would be with me. And I wasn't appreciating the fact that He's always with us. I was wanting some special thing instead of just the normal presence of God with you. And so anyway, during this time, I woke up one morning, and I don't know how to describe this, but it was like God died. It was just, there was no consciousness, no awareness of God, and I freaked out.
Join us tomorrow as Andrew passes through his dark night of the soul, 3 days in Vietnam when it seemed that God could not be found. Don't miss any part of this amazing week of TV programs as we discover the life-changing power of the Word of God in Andrew's 50 years of ministry.
Victoria and I and all of us here at Lakewood want to congratulate Pastor Wommack on 50 years of amazing ministry.
You have beat the devil's brains out for 50 years. Let's do another 50. Andrew, you got enough faith. I think you can do it.
Did you ever dream 50 years ago that today you would be shaking the world?
I know that that's quite a journey, and it takes a lot of going through things and coming out victorious on the other side to still be around after 50 years.
When you were in the service and you were in Vietnam, you sent your entire paycheck to the ministry that God had called us to.
I love you. I praise God for your ministry. Lindsay and I have watched you on television forever.
Congratulations for 50 years. I want to keep you for 50 more. God bless you and all that you do for the body of Christ.
We hope you've been blessed and inspired watching today's portion of Andrew Wommack, 50 Years with the True Gospel. If you'd like to own the entire documentary, be sure to order the special DVD set today for a gift of any amount. The second DVD in this set contains a collection of intriguing bonus scenes we were not able to include in the main story. These bonus features reveal little-known aspects of Andrew's life and ministry, not available anywhere else. You don't want to miss these.
I thought, man, with a guy this size ministry, he'd be living, in a gigantic house with, 5-car garage, all kinds of things, and it was a very modest house.
But it fits them. It's all that they need. They're not, and like he shares, how many bathrooms do you need in a house, or how many TVs can you watch at one time? And, they've got just this humble place, but it's just darling.
Let's try it one more time.
Yeah, one more time? He's going to say all that one more time?
I think it's been super successful.
Yes, it's been real successful. I think everybody's enjoyed it.
See, I gave you an opportunity and you didn't say nothing.
Anyway.
All right, let's go again.
Think about it. We're celebrating 50 years of ministry with no scandal. We're celebrating 50 years of ministry of faithfulness to wife and family. We're celebrating 50 years of a man that's one of the most loyal men I've ever met.
This commemorative DVD set is sure to become a collector's item and a lasting treasure to all those who've loved and supported Andrew Wommack over the years. And there's more to our 50-year celebration. Throughout this week on our website, we'll be giving away several ministry resources, including a grand prize of an entire library of Andrew's books and products. Go to awmi.net/anniversary for a full explanation. Our helpline number is 719-635-1111. If the lines are busy, remember you can order ministry materials or become a Grace Partner 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at awmi.net. To write us, use the address on your screen. We appreciate your generosity and hope to hear from you today.
I hope you've been blessed by going back and seeing how the Lord moved in my life so many years ago. But there's so many people that God could do this same thing for them. I'm reaching out every way that I can, and I would like to ask you to join with me and become a partner and help us get this out, because God is no respecter of persons. What He has done for me, He will do for anyone. And we just need the financial partners to be able to reach farther and deeper than we ever have before. So pray about it, and if the Lord speaks to you, become a partner with us today. I'd like to encourage you to check out our Gospel Truth TV. That's gospeltruth.tv. It's an internet-based television network, and you are not only going to get my teaching, but you are also going to hear instructors from Charis Bible College. You've got well-known people on there like Kenneth Copeland, Creflo Dollar, Jesse Duplantis, Keith Moore. These are some of the internationally known people. I think Rick Renner is going to be on there. Basically what this is, these are people that are all friends of mine that I have a relationship with. And one of the things about this that's going to be different is that if you watch the typical Christian television network, you are going to have people on there that are saying things exactly opposite of others. You have to pick and choose. And if all you did was listen to the typical Christian network 24 hours a day, you would be one confused person. These are all people that are friends of mine. We have differences and variances, but we're all preaching the same thing, and it's a safe place to be. You are going to be blessed. So check it out. It's 24/7, gospeltruth.tv.